Usually when you think about the physical laws of the universe, there's this deep, comforting predictability to them.
Right, yeah, like cause and effect.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, you hold out your hand, you drop an apple, and gravity just pulls it to the ground. Sir Isaac Newton mapped all this out centuries ago.
And it's clean, it's mathematical, and entirely rational.
Yeah, and we crave that rationality. We desperately want the world to operate as this, you know, predictable system of inputs and absolute outputs.
But that's not really how things work in the real world, is it?
No, not at all. Because something fascinating happens when you take that exact same brilliant mind, the guy who literally wrote the fundamental laws of physics, and you drop him into the financial markets, the math completely falls apart.
It really does. I mean, look at the early 1700s. There was this massive financial frenzy called the South Sea Bubble.
Right, where an English shipping company's stock went just entirely parabolic based on wild speculation.
Exactly. And Newton, being a cautious, highly intelligent guy, he initially bought some stock, made a very respectable 100% profit, and sold it.
Which is a perfectly rational move, right?
Totally rational. He locked in his gains, but then, the bubble kept expanding.
Yeah, and Newton watched as his friends, people who were nowhere near his intellectual equal, started getting obnoxiously rich.
They were buying estates, showing off their sudden wealth, and the smartest man in the world succumbed to the oldest emotional trap in the book.
FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Yep. He jumped back into the market at the absolute peak, pouring in his life savings. And then, well, the bubble popped.
And he lost almost everything.
He was financially ruined by the sheer irrationality of the crowd, combined with his own inability to manage his envy.
It's crazy. And he had this incredibly profound realization afterward. He famously wrote that he could calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people.
That's a great quote.
It is. And welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are exploring that exact phenomenon for you. We're unpacking a paradox that honestly keeps a lot of people up at night.
The big question of why smart people end up broke.
Exactly. Why is it that highly intelligent people geniuses even often end up completely broke, while people with seemingly average brain power can quietly build massive multi-generational fortunes?
So our mission today is to completely decouple the concept of brain power from financial success and figure out what actually drives wealth.
Because Newton's failure wasn't just some quirky historical anomaly, was it?
Not at all. When you look at decades of modern economic tracking and behavioral psychology,
Yeah.
it becomes very clear that being the smartest person in the room might actually be a financial liability.
Right, because there's this deeply ingrained societal assumption that, the kid who gets straight A's, aces the standardized tests, goes to the elite university, that kid is destined to be wealthy.
We all assume that. But when researchers actually track thousands of people over decades, the reality looks very different.
Like that massive longitudinal study of baby boomers led by Jay Zagorski.
Yes, the Zagorski study in the journal Intelligence. The data paints a very specific picture. On one hand, the assumption about earning power is absolutely correct.
A high IQ does consistently predict a higher income.
It does. The math from that tracking showed that for every single point your IQ increases, your annual salary tends to jump by anywhere from $200 to $600.
Which, that makes intuitive sense. If you have a high cognitive capacity, you're more likely to survive the grueling path of medical school or pass the bar exam.
Or write complex software. Yeah. You land a specialized, high-paying job, you generate a massive stream of cash.
But that is where the predictability completely stops.
It just drops off a cliff. When researchers took that exact same group of people and looked at their net worth, the actual wealth they had accumulated over their lifetimes, the correlation to their IQ vanished
Like
entirely.
practically zero. It's a crucial distinction you have to make if you want to understand money. Income is not wealth. Right. Income is simply the water flowing out of the faucet. Wealth is the water that actually stays in the bathtub.
It's the unspent cushion. And having a fire hose of an income does not mean you have a stopper in the drain.
Yeah. In fact, the data reveals a terrifying curve, doesn't it?
It really does. They found a quadratic relationship between intelligence and financial distress.
Wait, financial distress?
Yeah. At the extreme high end of the IQ bell curve, the likelihood of maxing out credit cards, missing mortgage payments, and declaring bankruptcy actually spikes.
That is wild. So, highly intelligent people are getting into deep financial trouble more often than people with perfectly average intelligence.
Exactly.
It's like putting a massive 1,000 horsepower engine into a car. That engine is your high IQ. It guarantees you can accelerate incredibly fast and generate a huge income.
Right. But if you spend all your time upgrading the engine and completely ignore the steering wheel and the brakes, you are going to win the race.
You're just going to hit the wall at a much higher speed.
And that raises the central mystery. Why do the brakes fail for the smartest people? Why does that 1,000-horsepower engine end up wrapped around a tree?
Well, according to the sources, a lot of it comes down to a psychological blind spot that gets installed very early in life.
The childhood experience. right?
Yeah. Think about the childhood of a highly intelligent person. From the moment they enter kindergarten, they are praised for their brain. They breeze through exams without studying.
And get the gold stars.
Exactly. The adults in their life constantly validate them for being right.
And that constant validation breeds a very specific, very dangerous form of overconfidence. When you spend your entire formative reality being the smartest person in the room, your ego fuses with your intellect.
You become accustomed to outthinking your problems.
Which means that when someone challenges your ideas, or when a strategy stops working, you don't view it as a simple mechanical failure.
You view being wrong as a fundamental attack on your identity.
Yes, you become completely resistant to feedback.
And you see this play out disastrously in the investing world. Highly intelligent professionals will build incredibly complex, highly optimized financial models.
They run the algorithms, they backtest the
Yeah,
data.
right, and they construct a portfolio that is mathematically perfect. But in their pursuit of that perfection, they completely eliminate any margin of error.
Because in a pure math problem, a margin of error is inefficient.
Yeah, if you're designing a high-performance sports car, you don't put a heavy, clunky spare tire in the trunk. It adds unnecessary weight.
It slows the car down. Mathematically, carrying a spare tire is suboptimal if you've calculated that the 4 tires on the car are in pristine condition.
But the global economy isn't a math problem.
No, it is a wildly unpredictable, deeply emotional ecosystem. Life is a continuous series of brutal surprises.
So true.
You could have the most optimized, high IQ financial plan in human history, but it'll shatter like glass when a completely unforeseeable event happens.
Like a sudden medical diagnosis or a global pandemic that shuts down the supply chain.
Or a massive geopolitical conflict. A highly intelligent person will look at a cash cushion money just sitting in a savings account doing nothing, lose a little bit to inflation, and they'll call it lazy capital.
They'll say it's foolish not to have every single dollar invested and optimized.
Right, but they are entirely blinded by their own arrogance. They assume their intellect can maneuver out of any crisis, so they refuse to carry the financial spare tire.
And then they hit a pothole.
Exactly. A reasonable financial plan, one that bends, one that carries a little too much cash, one that isn't perfectly optimized, that plan will survive the pothole.
While the flawless high IQ plan just snaps in half.
It does.
So if raw brain power and the arrogance of optimization are actively destroying wealth, we have to figure out what actually builds it. Like, what are the missing ingredients that convert that high-income faucet into actual lasting wealth?
Well, the scientific literature on this is fascinating because it completely sidelines cognitive capacity in favor of what we call soft skills.
Right, the paper from the Personality and Individual Differences Journal by Schaffer.
Yes. They analyzed general mental ability, which is essentially raw brain power. And the researchers found that immense mental ability only translates into high net worth if it's fused with 2 very specific traits.
High conscientiousness and a strong propensity for future planning.
Exactly. Conscientiousness is essentially the willingness to do the boring work.
It's the discipline to sit down and read the fine print on a mortgage document.
Or the habit of tracking your expenses, paying the utility bill on time.
And automating your investments month after month, year after year, without getting bored and trying to tinker with it.
It is entirely unglamorous. And we have to add emotional control to that list, too.
Yeah, that Durkee Park study was super interesting on that front.
Oh, absolutely. Behavioral finance analysts look deeply into how people manage their individual pension funds and retirement accounts.
And they found that emotional intelligence is the primary driver of successful risk management.
Right. When the stock market plummets by 30% in a week, complex algorithmic models don't save you.
No, what saves you is your ability to regulate your own panic.
Exactly. Physically stopping yourself from logging into your account and selling everything at the bottom.
And the broader economy is actually restructuring itself to reward this exact combination now.
The modern labor market has completely shifted. There's an NBER paper by David Deming showing that if you look at the last 40 years of wage growth, the massive payouts aren't going to people who just have raw cognitive skill.
The jobs that have seen the absolute highest wage growth require high math skills paired with incredibly high social skills.
That shift makes perfect logical sense, though. We've built supercomputers and AI to handle the routine, high math, highly optimized tasks.
Right, the sheer ability to calculate is no longer a scarce resource.
What machines absolutely cannot do is read a room. They can't negotiate a complex contract or empathize with a panicked client.
Or manage the delicate egos of a diverse team. Intelligence is simply a can-do trait. It means you possess the capacity.
But conscientiousness, emotional regulation, and social grace are will-do traits.
And without those will-do traits, the brain power is completely neutralized. I have to bring up a story that surfaced in a massive Reddit thread about this.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, people were sharing examples of the smartest people they knew who had completely failed in life. And one person described a family member who was a literal medical doctor.
With a genius-level IQ.
Right. Graduated at the absolute top of his class in medical school, brilliant diagnostician.
The absolute peak of cognitive achievement.
Yes, but he opened his own private practice and completely imploded.
And why was that?
Because he felt that basic administrative paperwork was beneath his intellect. He refused to learn the medical billing codes.
Whoa.
Yeah, he wouldn't submit the forms to the insurance companies because he found the task boring and intellectually unstimulating.
He thought his sheer brilliance as a doctor meant the money should just magically handle itself.
The hubris of intelligence in its purest form. He ended up losing his practice. He lost his medical license.
That's tragic.
He went through a brutal divorce, and the last update was that this brilliant, top-of-his-class doctor was sleeping on his elderly father's couch.
Ow.
And the kicker. He still actively complains that uneducated business owners make more money than he does. He genuinely believes the world is unfair to his genius.
It proves that intelligence is literally just a mathematical multiplier. If your social skills, your humility, and your discipline are a 0, it doesn't matter if your IQ is 160.
Right, 160 multiplied by 0 is still 0.
It's a brutal equation. But, we're operating on a massive assumption here that we really need to challenge.
What's that?
We've been framing this entire discussion around the idea that all highly intelligent people want to be wealthy, and that they're simply failing at it because of these blind spots.
Ah, right. But we need to consider that many of them are playing a completely different game.
Exactly. That's a critical perspective. When you dive into the conversations highly intelligent people have amongst themselves, like in those online forums, you realize that many of them possess incredibly strict moral frameworks.
They look at the hyper-competitive corporate capitalist structure, and they see a system that is fundamentally flawed.
They see a game that requires exploiting behavioral loopholes, stepping on competitors, or prioritizing endless consumer growth over human well-being.
And they recognize that the system isn't purely merit-based, so they just consciously refuse to participate in it.
Right. Instead of chasing corporate wealth, they gravitate toward fields that offer deep intellectual satisfaction. They become independent researchers, social workers, or academics.
Choosing a life of discovery and public service, knowing full well that those fields aren't designed to generate massive financial payouts.
And you can trace this mindset all the way back to antiquity. Look at Diogenes, the brilliant Greek philosopher.
Oh yeah, the guy who lived in a pot.
Literally lived by choice in a large clay pot on the streets of Athens. He believed that material possessions were an absolute trap that distracted from truth and virtue.
Didn't Alexander the Great come to meet him?
He did. Alexander the Great, the most powerful, wealthy man in the world, offered Diogenes anything he wanted. And Diogenes just looked at him and asked him to stop blocking his sunlight.
I love that. He valued absolute freedom over status, which actually brings us to a psychological trap that destroys the wealth of the modern middle and upper class.
Morgan Housel's man in the car paradox.
Yes, it is one of the most profound observations about why people spend money.
Let's walk through exactly how this paradox works. Imagine you're standing at a crosswalk, and a stunning, brand new $300,000 Ferrari pulls up to the red light.
Okay, picturing it.
What goes through your mind? You almost never look at the person behind the wheel and think, wow, the driver of that car must be incredibly smart, successful, and worthy of my deep respect.
Never. I mean, you don't care about the driver at all. You immediately project yourself into the driver's seat.
Exactly. You imagine how cool people would think you were if you were the one driving that car.
And that is the massive, devastating irony of the status game. The person who bought the Ferrari spent $300,000 specifically to buy the respect and admiration of strangers.
But the strangers ignore the driver completely. They just use the car as a mirror for their own desires.
The driver spent a fortune to become a ghost.
And highly intelligent, deeply observant people see right through this paradox. They realize that spending money to show people how much money you have is the literal fastest way to have less money.
True wealth is completely invisible. Wealth is the sports car you didn't buy.
It's the first-class upgrade you declined.
It's the kitchen renovation you postponed. They see that the pursuit of status is a treadmill with absolutely no finish line, so they just step off the machine.
They live in modest homes and drive 10-year-old sedans, not because they're failing at the game of capitalism, but because they have purchased the ultimate luxury: freedom and time.
We constantly misjudge people based on our own financial timelines and our own psychological scars, don't we?
Oh, constantly. The concept of psychological scars is vital here. Personal finance is deeply, intimately personal. It's rarely just about finance.
Think about someone who lived through the absolute terror of the 2008 financial collapse.
Right. Maybe they lost their home or watched their parents lose their retirement overnight.
And now, 15 years later, they might hoard $50,000 in cash in a physical safe under their bed.
And a 25-year-old day trader with a finance degree will look at that and call them an idiot.
The day trader will run the math and show how much purchasing power that cash is losing to inflation every single year.
And mathematically, the day trader is correct. But they are completely missing the point. The person hoarding the cash isn't playing a growth game.
They're playing a survival game.
Exactly. They're making decisions based on trauma and lived experience.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet doesn't matter if the cash under the bed is the only thing that allows them to sleep peacefully at night.
Which transitions perfectly into the final and perhaps most difficult piece of the puzzle for you, the listener, if you do want to build and keep wealth.
The difference between getting rich and staying rich.
Yes. The skills required to get rich are the exact opposite of the skills required to stay rich.
We see this dichotomy constantly in history, but never more clearly than during the great stock market crash of 1929.
You had two men on entirely opposite trajectories, Jesse Livermore and Abraham Jermansky.
Right. Jesse Livermore was arguably the greatest stock trader of his generation, a true financial genius. He saw the crash coming, heavily shorted the market, and over a few days in October made the modern equivalent of $3 billion.
While the rest of the country was financially annihilated.
Yep.
And in that exact same week, a very wealthy real estate developer named Abraham Jermansky, who had heavily leveraged himself in the roaring 20s, lost absolutely everything.
He vanished, leaving nothing but debt behind. Livermore had won the ultimate financial victory. He had mastered the art of getting rich.
Getting rich requires you to be relentlessly optimistic. You have to take massive risks. You have to bet on yourself and swing for the fences.
And Livermore had those traits in spades, but he completely lacked the skills to stay rich.
Because staying rich requires humility. It requires a healthy dose of paranoia and this constant lingering fear that the market could take everything away from you tomorrow.
But Livermore felt invincible. He felt his massive intellect had conquered the market.
So instead of walking away with his billions, he kept making larger, riskier, increasingly arrogant bets.
And within 4 years of his great triumph, Livermore had lost every single penny. He went completely bankrupt.
He fundamentally misunderstood the mastery of time. Wealth preservation relies on the mathematical miracle of compounding.
Which is a concept the human brain is practically hardwired to misunderstand.
Yeah, we evolved to think linearly. Like if you gather 3 apples a day, in 5 days you have 15 apples. It's simple addition. But compounding is exponential. It builds on itself, creating a hockey stick curve that defies human intuition.
Look at Warren Buffett. Yes, he is brilliant, and he is deeply analytical. But his true competitive advantage isn't his intellect, it's his endurance.
People love to compare Buffett to Jim Simons, the legendary quantitative investor. Simons was a mathematical genius who built algorithms that generated mind-boggling returns.
Like averaging roughly 66% a year, right?
Exactly. While Buffett's average annual return is only around 22%.
So Simons' returns were 3 times higher than Buffett's. But Buffett's total accumulated wealth is vastly larger. How is that mathematically possible?
Because Jim Simons didn't find his financial stride until he was in his 50s. Warren Buffett started investing when he was 10 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and he has let that money compound for over 80 years. The sheer duration of the investment completely overpowers the higher rate of return.
Good investing isn't about being smart enough to earn the highest possible return in a single year. No, it's about earning a pretty good, entirely average return and sustaining it for an incredibly long period of time without ever interrupting the process.
It's the glacier analogy. Morgan Housel uses this to explain compounding, and it completely rewrites how you view growth.
Oh, the Ice Age comparison, that's brilliant.
Yeah. When we think of an ice age, we picture this apocalyptic, sudden blizzard that buries the Earth in miles of ice overnight.
But that's not how geology works.
Not at all. Ice ages are caused by a slight shift in the Earth's orbit that results in summers that are just a fraction of a degree cooler than normal.
Just cool enough that a tiny, paper-thin layer of winter snow survives the summer melt.
Exactly. And the next winter, fresh snow falls on top of that lingering layer. Because the ice is highly reflective, it bounces a tiny bit more sunlight back into space.
Which makes the subsequent summer even cooler, so a slightly thicker layer of ice survives.
It's an incredibly slow, entirely boring process. But given enough time, that thin layer of snow compounds into a continent-crushing glacier.
So financial genius isn't about conjuring a massive blizzard of returns. It's simply about not letting the snow melt.
Surviving the summer, that is the essence of wealth.
Absolutely.
So bringing all of this together for you listening right now, true wealth is not a measure of your IQ.
It doesn't matter how high you score on a standardized test.
It doesn't matter how complex your spreadsheets are, and it certainly doesn't depend on your ability to predict the macroeconomic future. If Isaac Newton couldn't outsmart the market, you probably can't either.
Wealth is a measure of your behavior. It's about checking your ego at the door and deliberately leaving a massive margin for error in your plans.
Parry the spare tire. True financial success means combining whatever cognitive ability you have with the soft skills.
Emotional regulation during a crisis, the social grace to work well with others, and the quiet discipline to do the boring work.
And most importantly, it requires the profound, egoless patience to let your financial glacier grow over decades.
Real wealth is ultimately the freedom, the time, and the absolute peace of mind you gain by knowing when you finally have enough and just stepping off the treadmill.
It's recognizing that the ultimate flex isn't what you buy, it's the autonomy you preserve.
Well said.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about a financial goal or a money problem you are stressing over right now.
Are you trying to solve it using raw intelligence?
Are you constantly checking your portfolio, endlessly tweaking your investments, reading every financial news article, and desperately looking for a smarter shortcut to force a blizzard?
It's an exhausting way to live.
It really is. What if the absolute most brilliant, high IQ financial move you can make tomorrow is to just do absolutely nothing?
Let the snow sit.
What if true genius is simply having the humility to step back, leave the snow alone, and let time do the heavy lifting? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.